My name is Russell Robinson. Like Jennifer said, I'm a professor and director of the Undergraduate Leadership Program here at Key. Uh, and thanks to Patrick Malone, Vicky, Vicky Wilkins, our provost, because they've allowed me this flexibility to kind of come up with this separate aspect of the FEDTalks series where we talk about leadership, different aspects of leadership. And how we got to this topic today really gets to, for those who have been on this series, I left government service after 22 years to come work at American. And what I found talking to key certificate students, those my age, a little older, a little younger, they're really fascinated with how I've navigated my career towards being more aligned to my purpose. I started thinking about this. Muhammad Ali, who I'm a big fan of, says if a man has the same view of life at 50 as he did at 20, I will show you a man who's wasted 30 years of his life. In conversations with my undergraduate students, they just see life as this straight shot. So I was really curious to talk about purpose. And I wanted to bring in these two experts at it. Mika Cross, who is CEO of Strategy at Work, was a former civil servant, U.S. Army retired. Right now, she is in this space where, listen, when it comes to the future of work, workplace transformation, strategy, leadership, she's especially in federal service, she's someone to know. She's got her own business, doing well. And then one of my favorite key students, Colin Pascal, who is also U.S. Army retired. No disrespect to the others branches of the service. We will find a way to get you in. And Colin is kind of this jack of all trades now. He's a writer for or a guest contributor to The Hill and the Baltimore Sun. He's CEO of Annapolis Development Group. About to start work on a think tank, very active in his church and other foundations. So I'm interested to see how both of them have navigated their spaces and places towards a purpose-driven life. So with that, we're putting this thing together. So I'm gonna let both of them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit more about themselves beyond what I've said, and then we'll get into our Q&A. You all know how we do. If you've been on these, we'll do a Q&A with myself and the panelists. Then we'll open it up for Q&A with you all. Do a hard stop at one for those who have to leave. For those who can stay, we'll do our Trevor Noah between the scenes and go on a little afterwards. So with that being said, ladies first, Mika, would you please tell people what about yourself that I haven't already discussed, and then we'll jump right into Colin.
I will. Thank you so much. First, I have to say, I am not an actress or a voiceover expert, but you'll be hearing a little raspiness from me today just because I'm feeling a little under the weather. So the holiday germs have got me. But super excited to be spending some time with you. And Russell, thank you so much to you and the Key Executive Programs in American University for bringing us together. Love this topic. Because I do have to say, I think I'm one of the few folks that have probably transitioned more times than you can count on your two hands together, from active duty enlisted service in the U.S. Army, as you mentioned, to then becoming a commissioned officer in the United States Army on active duty, working in the U.S. intelligence community after 9/11 with a top secret clearance, traipsing my way all across the U.S. federal government, working in places that y'all are probably familiar with: USDA, OPM, Department of Labor, small agencies in the FIREA, until bouncing out after 20 plus years of service as well to test the waters in private industry, where I went to work for one of the pioneers in remote work well before the global pandemic, called Flex Jobs. And there I served for a few years as the vice president of employer engagement, working with employers of all sizes, types, industries, and occupations, all whom were committed to leveraging flexible and different ways of working, for the purpose of attracting, retaining, and engaging top talent. Before then, jumping over to business ownership, as Russ said, I am now the owner and operator of a small veteran-owned small business called Strategy at Work, and we are hyper committed to really focus on the human layer of work. But at the core and crux of my journey was following, yes, purpose, but also designing a life and a career that would fit with my passion, with what I felt like was my calling, and also the things that were most important to my life and what I needed out of an experience, whether in the job market or in life itself as a single mom, navigating all those things while parenting two humans. So I'm super excited to be spending some time with you and diving into our conversation today.
Colin, it's going to be hard to follow that up, man, but do the best you can.
It is pretty hard, and I have to deduct 5 points from you, even though I'm your student, because my last name's pronounced Pascal. And
Did I make that mistake again?
that's okay. When I was in the Army, Mika remembers our name is written on our shirt, and my name does look like Pascal, so I would open every single engagement I had in the Army by saying, "If you remember that guy's a rascal, then you'll always get my name right." But I did just over 20 years in the Army before coming to Key 57. Mika and I didn't cross paths, but we worked in some of the same places. I was an intelligence officer for most of my career, focused on counterintelligence and human intelligence. So for the counterintelligence parts of the career, I did my best to make sure that foreign nations could not steal our sensitive information. And then as a human intelligence officer, I did my best to convince foreigners to give up their sensitive information to us. But it was a great career. I would say that I'm in the process of reinventing myself still. It's been a significant change, and I've been out of the Army for about a year and a half now. And I'm very happy with the road, but I think Mika alluded to it, and I agree that it's probably always a little bit of an ongoing process, especially when you've left something as all-encompassing as the military, to redefine yourself and to find the things that inspire you and move you now.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's go ahead and dig on in. And as we go, for everybody here, please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. So again, we're going to start off with, I want to take both of you back to your decision to enlist in the Army. Talk about your thoughts on why you chose to serve the country in this way, and kind of what you anticipated your life to be when you made that decision. We'll start with Mika, and then pivot to Colin.
Sure. Okay. Well, this is called FEDTalks, but I'm going to keep it real for real talk too. I mean, I was a teenager, I was a little baby when I raised my right hand the first time. I think I've raised it probably 15 to 20 times since then. But I didn't quite know what my purpose was necessarily. I was feeling a little lost. I had completed a year and a half of undergraduate school as a journalism major. Shocker, you may not have known that about me. I thought I was going to go off to New York City and work as a public relations agent in my life, maybe for Viacom or MTV Studios. Who knows? Maybe I can still do that. But I was at a point in my life where I was just feeling a little lost. I didn't have the resources to be able to continue paying for school if I wasn't really focused and driven. And so I took a hiatus. I disenrolled after about a year and a half, went to work for a chiropractic agency as a medical report writer. And I thought, oh, well, that justifies it a little bit, even though I'm taking a little bit of a gap, not year, but a few months. I'm at least still writing. So it's something related to what I thought I wanted to do. And I luckily stumbled across this wonderful woman who had been an Army enlisted soldier herself, was in the Women's Army Corps long ago, and had been working for the National Park Service, and sort of took me under her wing as a mentor and was trying to give me advice and guidance in terms of how I could get back on the path of finishing school and chasing my dreams. And she really was encouraging me to think about enlisting in the Army, which I thought was hilarious at the time. Wasn't quite sure if I was cut out for it. But what I did know is that there are many people in your life that are much smarter than you. And so sometimes when people are making a recommendation, even if you can't see yourself in that or it may not fit at the moment, listening and exploring with a sense of curiosity is important. So I started asking a lot of questions, learning about her experiences, and it really did resonate with me, thinking about that there might be a bigger calling. I could serve the country in this certain way, grow my expertise, build my credit, travel, and get back on the path of finishing school. So that was the first draw to service and why I did. I walked into the recruitment center, Russell, and this was one of those joint recruitment centers where they had every branch of service. I mean, it was like, whoa, when I walked in and did the test, because I didn't really know what I was asking for or what I wanted. But I had this wonderful mentor who put me in the right path, and she was there when I had questions and when I went to MEPS and when I was going through all the steps to try to fit or choose the right job also for me. So I ended up taking 71 Lima. It doesn't exist anymore. That was your general admin officer. I was a PV2, literally enlisted 2, one of the lowest ranks you can get, and got shipped off to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I served with the 16th Cavalry Unit supporting the International Military Student Office. And that first job for me was in support of all the NATO officers that came and trained with US forces. And so I supported them, but also their families. And I got to rub shoulders with the colonels and generals on the installation and got to go to garden parties. And that was the start of my career. And really, I just did what I was told, did it well. And that sort of got noticed and is why then I was offered the opportunity to go pursue a commissioned officer role as well.
Awesome. Colin.
Yeah, first I would say for folks that don't know, when you start out as an enlisted soldier the way Mika did, and people grab a hold of you and say, hey, you should be an officer, it's a big deal. So those of us that came from the service, Mika, I recognize that people saw talent in you very early, but it's not usual for people to go from being enlisted to being officer. I did not do that. I did a 4-year ROTC scholarship at a small school called St. Bonaventure University. So I was always on a commissioning path and did not serve any time as an enlisted soldier. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into with the Army. But I went to a military high school, boarding school, and I enjoyed the structure of it. And I enjoyed the side of the military that was serious. My personality is probably a little bit serious, and a little bit stoic. My 7-year-old daughter says that I don't have a sense of humor. I argue with her. But I did like that the fact that everything we did in the military, there was something that mattered very deeply to the country and to other people. And even when I didn't realize exactly what those things were, I recognized that that was a place to contribute to something that mattered. There are other places to do it. I just didn't know about them at the time, and the structure really called to me. But the idea that I wanted to participate in something at the macro level that was larger than myself is what pulled me to the Army. And that's what kept me in the Army for 20 years also.
So let me ask you something for both of you for your Army service. If you could pick one thing where you say, here's what I'm most proud of. Here's one thing that I'm glad I accomplished. That was the reason why I enlisted in the Army, to serve my country. What would be that one accomplishment? Colin first, then Mika.
Okay. I spent a lot of time work. I spent 5 years, 4.5 years, 5 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of that time was spent one-on-one, particularly with Iraqis. And there were a number of times early in my career when I got in trouble for doing things like taking off my sunglasses, taking off my Kevlar helmet, walking down the street without a rifle at the ready. But I'm incredibly proud of it, not because we necessarily made Iraq a functioning democracy, but I knew even in my early 20s that the only way we might be able to do that is if we built real relationships with the people who were there. And at a time when the Army was very focused on protecting itself, rightfully so, because we all wanted to come home, I had a little bit of wisdom to know that I would have to assume a little bit of personal risk to get out on the street and engage with people human to human. And I saw that work. And some of those relationships have persisted now for over 20 years. From time to time, I'll still talk to Iraqis that I knew on WhatsApp and through email. And I'm proud of it because it wasn't the norm. It became a little bit more normal later, but I was really very early in recognizing that the human to human contact mattered. And after 20 years, that's probably the thing I'm still the most proud of.
All right, Mika.
That's so powerful. Um, I would say this experience that happened, it was after the birth of my first baby. I was on maternity leave and came back. and got notified. By the way, I was a first lieutenant at the time. So this is after I had transitioned to a commissioned officer and I was working in the intelligence community. Came back off maternity leave, which at that time was only like 6 weeks, I want to say, and had to go straight back to work and try to navigate that. And the chief of the military personnel branch, I was the XO at the time, even though I was echelons lower in grade than normally you would traditionally be in that role, but was working for the Defense Intelligence Agency at the military personnel branch and was told that our agency was going to be the executive agent of this huge mission called the Iraq Survey Group. The ISG was stood up in support of the WMD search, and across the intelligence community had to quickly establish a joint one personnel office, a joint manning document, protocols for deploying en masse civilians across the US intelligence community, international officers, military service members of all branches, and contractors for the first time ever at scale. And my colonel wanted me to be the lead of the J1 rear. I said, oh, I think maybe the Navy commander who I worked with, he would really be great. And he wants to do that. Maybe not me. And they said, no, we want you to do it. I really didn't want that job. I really didn't know what I was getting into. I was so scared working with 06 colonels and above, again, echelons above my pay level. I barely saw my newborn baby at night, but that mission was so important and impactful. And what I learned in that process around grit and resilience and working across boundaries and borders from international forces to across the intelligence community, and also considering family members and the whole soldier and the whole person when people then had to come back and reintegrate into their roles, into their mission. That experience was so powerful for me. It was one of the reasons why I decided to resign my commission when I became a captain, when I had a choice to then go back and work for Uncle Sam out of uniform, continue serving out of uniform. But it also really shaped who I am to become such an advocate of the whole person when it relates to national security, mission readiness, and really serving in that way. So I would say that experience.
All right, so you transition to the next question. You've gotten to this point where you've seen this, you're starting to see this life outside of active Army service, right? Mika, you resigned. Colin, you said you retired a little over a year ago. Talk me through that decision to make that transition and kind of what your relationship was like with your purpose in when you made that decision. Colin first, then Mika.
Yeah, so I really I had a little bit of a, I would say, an unfortunate end in that I ended up getting a performance evaluation that would have made it very difficult for me to continue getting promoted. And I had a stellar record, and I had done very well. I was a battalion commander. I wrote a chapter in a book called Mentorship Mastery that talked about the experience of being a high performer who all of a sudden was not a high performer. But I had to make a decision on whether or not I was going to continue in the Army and try to fight for promotions and to recover from this, or to build a future somewhere else. And the God's honest truth is it was important for me to get back to contributing as quickly as possible. And my assessment was that it was going to be very difficult for me to continue moving forward in the Army. And so, in a way, the Army made that decision for me. I don't have any regrets necessarily, but there's always a piece of me that would have rather ended under different terms. I've written about it. I'm happy to talk about it. But I really found myself having to reinvent myself almost at an unexpected moment, because the plan had been to continue for another 10 years and really to be competitive for general officer. And my record had been good enough that that was the case. But I found myself as a 20-year lieutenant colonel really staring down what was probably going to be a hard road to promotion, and really having to figure out who I was without the Army, not as a crutch, but as a big piece of the person I had been since the day that I had left college. Key 57 became part of that. But there were a number of other things that became part of that also.
Mm.
But it was an unexpected reinvention. And actually, if I'm being honest about it, I'm proud of how it went.
So let me ask you a follow-up before I get to
Yeah.
Mika. I know talking to some of my students and friends who chose the Vera option or the DRP option to leave government, the ones I found who struggled were the ones who felt their job was their identity.
Yeah.
So, Colin, for you, was the Army part of your identity? And if it was, what impact did that have on you being able to make this decision to become something new? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that the Army was a huge part of my identity. And I think that one of the gifts of not being forced out of the Army, but being forced to make a very hard decision about staying to fight for promotion or trying to build a successful and impactful life elsewhere. Part of the gift of that for me was that in my early 40s, I was able to recognize that I was much more than an Army officer. And really, until that moment when I was forced to step out into the world and not be an Army officer, I really had never thought of who I was. Um, and really, for the first few months, Russell, I wasn't sure that there was somebody on the other side of that. But when I look at all the positives that came from really what I would describe as a negative experience, a career that was going well until it wasn't, one of the positives is that the person that I am today is not tied to an institutional identity. And prior to leaving the Army, I think that it was. And I don't know if I could have described myself well absent talking about the Army. And I think I can do that really well now.
All right, Mika, your answer, your turn.
Well, I have to say this resonates so much for me because I think I learned that lesson really early on. Um, Not to define your sense of success, your sense of identity, your sense of purpose around this strict job description or this position, grade, rank, or even salary, like dollar amount. And that's really hard to do in this society, I believe, and especially hard to do in a system like the United States military or the intelligence community or the US federal government or the government at large. But even in private industry, even when you work for yourself, you can get this sense of inflated self, oh, I'm a CEO, I'm a founder, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an award-winning XYZ, insert all those titles. But I really did learn to define success uniquely for me. And that has served me well throughout every transition and every punt, sometimes better than others, that I've had to make in my life and career, or that I got the opportunity to make. In some cases, I think we forget how much of a privilege it is to have choices to make. And early on in my career, whether it be in the military or even in the federal government when I was junior graded and coming up through the ranks, often we don't have as many choices until you get to that level, until you get to a higher position, until you get to a senior leadership or an executive role. But I like to ground myself around the micro decisions that are there in front of you. So my decision to leave the Army was not an easy one. I also loved it. I loved it. It was part of who I am. I mean, since I was 19, I was serving my country. I had become an officer. I was pretty proud of that. I was asked to take and step into roles that were much higher level than my position or grade or title. And that felt really good, quite frankly. I was winning awards. I was getting below the zone. That's quickly on the list to get promoted. And I had made a really hard decision that frankly was very surprising and maybe wasn't very well understood. I knew though that I wanted to be a certain kind of parent. Stepping into that role of motherhood was really important to me. And so designing a career where I could be more present and hands-on at a time where at the time my daughter was an infant, but where she was in her formulative years was a definition of success for me. So I took a leap of faith and started to look to see what other options might be out there. And I'll tell you, in the end, Russell, my position working in the federal government as a civilian was the least paying option of all the options that I had. Because at the time I had a TSSCI, top secret clearance. I had a master's degree. I had managed lots and lots of people, even though I was only 28, 29 years old. I'd accomplished a lot. And I could have taken a much higher paying job with a contractor in the Beltway. But I wanted to learn, grow, do something meaningful, and have a life outside of work as well.
Awesome. 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 So you touched on some interesting things, Mika. Teaching 18 to 19-year-olds, it's often to tell them you have a voice. I want you to bring your voice in. Please be very strategic and make sure you base your voice on evidential data. For my students my age, a little older than a little younger, you always have a voice and you always have a choice. So the question for both of you all, especially looking at choices, a lot of times choices are impacted by fear, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So quickly for both of you, and again, we'll go Colin and then Mika, what's your relationship like with fear?
It was probably not great when I was leaving the Army, and I think I'm very comfortable with it now. And there was a question in the chat also about how did I sort of learn to describe myself outside of the Army, and I can sort of answer that as I address this question. In the Army, the path is kind of clear. The way we succeed is kind of clear. There's a lot that's very predictable about it. But there's not a ton of space necessarily for us to choose our own road. And I think the hardest thing and what generates fear in me, especially as I was leaving the Army, was having for the first time to create a path, not
Mhm.
walking a path that had already been laid for me, but having to create a path. Um, and what I found 6 months after being out of the Army and now 18 months out of being out of the Army is that not only was I capable of doing that, but I really think I did it really well. And when I look back on my Army career, there are things I'm proud of. We talked about one of them, but it's very hard to differentiate between the things that I would have done had I been left to my own devices and the things that I did because the Army told me to do them. And there's a certain pride and self-esteem that I think people develop when they can rest assured that these good works that they're doing in the world are wholly because they chose to do them. And really, you never get to fully own that in the Army because you really are given the list of things that you should do to do well. And when I look back now and I look at the numbers of things that I'm involved in, I would like to argue the numbers of people's lives that I've been able to touch through some of my volunteer work.
Yeah.
I was able to take stock of the human being that I was by the freedom that I had and what I did with it. And it was only after leaving the Army that I ever got to know myself because it was the first time that I had a choice fully in how I spent my time. And then I think the wisdom was just really looking at myself and how I had used that time. And when I looked back over those 18 months, I said, no, this is somebody who's not only well suited to succeed in the world, but given the opportunity, will use their talents to alleviate some suffering, to improve other people, and to contribute in positive ways. And I did it on my own. And so I proved to myself that that really was who I am.
Awesome. Fantastic. I got so many follow-up questions, but we have a limited amount of time, so we're going to let Mika go.
I have follow-up questions too. All right, fear. The former federal CIO, Chief Information Officer at the White House, and Navy veteran, go Navy, although Army beats Navy now, Maria Rote, gave this wonderful quote that she offered in a panel of women in technology many, many years ago when I moderated it. And it's such a reminder, I think, in different moments of my career, which is there is no growth in your comfort zone, and there is no comfort in your growth zone. And reflecting on my own personal career, even when there were choices that were risky and really scary. I mean, there's been moments where I've made career decisions, business ownership, full-time business ownership, and leaving a job that has a steady paycheck and benefits when you are the single head of the ship. I am a single parent. And so when I have two humans under my roof, I have to provide for them. And when they were little, I couldn't take as much risk. As they were growing and almost out the door, I could take a little more risk. But it's not easy. I do feel like a healthy balance of following your instinct, listening to your head, heart, and feet, and how that feels in your body. You can probably sense it. And being intelligent about the decisions that you're making, even if you're fearful, scared, uncertain, all of those things is really important. So, informed decision, but embracing fear and uncertainty, the uncomfortableness of new, different, unexpected sometimes can land you in the most amazing places that you might not ever anticipate. And that's where real growth comes from. At least that's been in my experience. Even when it didn't work out, there's been times, yes, there have been times where it did not work out. Jobs where I have said yes, I thought it was the right decision, and 90 days later, I am waving the white flag. I'm not the one helping someone else get out. I'm asking for help. I made a wrong decision. I need to leave. And so I think a healthy balance of risk to benefit ratio, following your instincts, but also knowing that there is not a sense of comfort when you are growing and taking risks.
Awesome. Awesome. Let me ask you all this. So as you all are navigating into this adult you're becoming, and you see your purpose manifesting, and where I say this is for everybody, Mika and I are both in the future of workspace. So we have had conversations about what leadership is in the public service, where it should go. Colin and I are both Maryland guys, and we'll talk and agree and disagree. And I think we're at the point where we're like, politically, we're about half a standard deviation away from having the exact same thoughts on everything. So the question I want to ask you all, for where you are at this point in your lives, what problem out there is it that you are trying to solve? We'll go Mika first, then Colin.
Okay. The problem for me that I'm trying to solve and that I feel called to really work on for others is nonconformity with the traditional old school way of work and what the traditional models are, because they typically don't fit most. Whether it's flexibility in location, whether it's work schedule flexibility, whether it's when you perform your work, how you perform your work, where you perform your work, career pathing, the traditional idea of this old school structure of what a career has to look like or what it did look like and what you need to follow, typically, let's just be real, doesn't fit most of our lives. And so if we can approach work in a different dynamic way, starting at the top with the organization's goals, objectives, performance measures, outcomes-based approach, and then focused on the hearts, minds, and behaviors of leaders and supervisors, and a sense of personal accountability across the workforce, meaning what you or I as an individual contributor bring to work, how we show up for the mission and for others matters so deeply. It affects profitability, performance, productivity, outcomes, efficiencies, all the things in public sector or private sector that organizations and business owners are trying to focus on. And I am hyper passionate about helping organizations do that. And we do it through training, consulting, facilitation, events, conversations like this, but through frameworks that really matter and that can make a difference. And I needed it for my own personal life, but I also saw the world of work through my children's lives, especially my youngest, who was experiencing some minor special needs very, very young and early on. And my thought was like, how are we going to create success and opportunities to bring your best to work when there are so many different preferences, competencies, skill levels, and workspace design that works for people in one way and might not work for others in another? And so helping organizations and leaders in any sector, in any organization, bridge that gap between people, performance, and progress is my passion. It's also my superpower.
Awesome. Before you go, everybody, we're going to be doing open it up for your Q&A about 5-ish minutes. So please populate your questions in the Q&A. Colin, your a problem you're trying to solve.
It's a big one. It's the polarization in our politics, and I try to do it in Maryland first, but the Hill's given me an outlet. I published 9 times with them this year, um, and I'm an interesting character politically. So I was at a fundraiser last week for a group called the Maryland Family Institute, which is the most conservative outfit in Maryland. And next week I'm hosting a fundraiser for a Democratic candidate, Rebecca Bennett, at my house, who's running for Congress in New Jersey. I worked on Larry Hogan's Senate campaign last year, but I've been a Democrat for most of my life. And in my writing and in my life, I try very hard to be a bridge between groups of people who both love this country, who both want what's best for most Americans, but have forgotten that that's true about the other side. And I didn't know when I retired from the Army that I would enjoy writing or that I would have an outlet, but I've published 60 articles since midsummer of 2024. And I put out 2 or 3 a month in the Baltimore Sun. I put out 1 a month in the Hill. I'm working on a book right now that tries to offer centrist positions to hard topics like abortion and guns. And I've got 2 younger kids, and a lot of folks that are on this are younger themselves. And we have a responsibility to leave a functioning, prosperous, kind country behind us. And I feel called to do my best to contribute in that space. And for whatever reason, I'm able to be in the room with MAGA people, and I'm able to be in the room with Mamdani people. And I understand where both of them are coming from, and I trust their good intentions, even if I don't always agree with their policies. And so I guess Mika used the term superpower. Maybe that's mine, that I can just be around these people with such disparate views of political issues and still see the goodness in both sides, and try to write and speak in a way that encourages others to see the goodness in the other side also.
So I think, last question before we open it up to the general Q&A, folks. Really simple. So what do you think your purpose is right now, right? For the age, space, and place you are currently occupying. Why are you here? What is your passion? What is your purpose? Right. So I'm going to give Mika time to think about it. And I will say, and then Colin, but I'll briefly say, for me, the decision to leave government, it really got to, how do I have impact? How do I have impact? How do I have impact on leaders and leadership? And I found I needed to move to a direction where there is more curiosity. So my purpose is to spark curiosity, and I'm fascinated to be able to do it on a college campus as opposed to government. So instead of working with established leaders, we build those skills and muscles on the journey to leadership. So that being said, Mika, what's your purpose?
Yeah. One thing I just want to mention before I answer that is that if you listen to all of the answers in our conversation between all 3 of us here, and I'm so eager to hear what folks in the chat are saying too, or the questions that they have, but is that we keep serving in our own capacity, just in a different sector. So we never stopped serving. And all 3 of us come from a life of service. And I suspect many of you do as well. And so I just want to foot stomp the fact that even past your role in the military or your role working for the public sector, you can still serve others in the most important ways when you get grounded around what your purpose is. So for me, what's my purpose now, Russell? It's adding value for those who are struggling the most. And it didn't look the same as it did in 2024 or 2023 during the pandemic, at the heels of the end of the global pandemic. So I have to continuously shape and evolve to the needs of others. What's going on in the market? What's going on with the political atmosphere? What's going on in the economy, so that I can drive the best results for people and the organizations. And that's what I've been doing. I've been focusing on, how do you pivot after job loss? How do you navigate layoffs? What are you doing as an early careerist and a recent graduate and trying to navigate this job market? I'm helping people adopt to AI from a non-technical lens, meaning how are you ready or not for AI and acceleration if you are a non-technical leader or in a frontline role. I am working with people on well-being and mental health to help solve that crisis and that sense of disconnection in the workplace. I am filling the cracks, and I'm not just doing it alone. I also believe very deeply in a sense of partnership and collaboration with other experts, other thought leaders, and other small businesses or experts in the government and academia, Russell, to help solve these problems.
All right, Colin, bring us home for this section.
Yeah, simple purpose, make our politics kinder and more productive. And everything that I do, I look at through that lens, and if I don't think it's doing that, then I move on and do something else.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So let's get to our Q&A. So let's see. For the panel, can you discuss the power of resiliency and lessons learned when navigating an unfamiliar ecosystem?
Yeah, I can start if you want, and I'll tell
Okay.
everybody. When I was leaving the Army, there were a couple of moments when I was sort of curled up on the basement floor, and the kids were at school. Caroline was at work, my wife, and I really didn't know if I was gonna make it on the outside. Now I knew that we wouldn't starve, but I didn't know if I would have an impact. And I didn't know if in my early 40s I had peaked and done all the important work that I was going to do. Um, Resiliency for me really was rooted in a couple of people in my life, one of whom I wrote that chapter about, a guy named John Tyker, who's a retired Air Force Brigadier General. Um, and I think I probably could not have made it through that really challenging time if I had had to do it by myself. And so one of the great gifts that I'd given myself, even though I didn't realize it, is that I really had collected and earned some really strong, meaningful, deep, and real relationships along the way. And no matter what happened in my professional life, none of those people who knew me well personally ever looked at me differently, treated me differently, so that there was a sense of normalcy in what was not really a normal time for me. And I think had I not had those relationships, I'm not sure where resiliency comes from at that point.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of deep faith. I'm in church quite a bit, but really that faith is manifest in the human beings that God sort of put on this earth alongside of us. And so the key to resiliency is be good to people along the way. Make sure you stay in touch with them, and then don't try to navigate the hard things by yourself. Lean on the relationships that you've earned. And I use that word earned very deliberately, that you've earned along the way.
Yeah, let me jump in, and then Mika, you can jump in. I think for let me put on my professor hat. So for both my undergraduate classes, we looked at this 2019 Deloitte Insights article, which talks about the future of public service. Along with the other future of work, it talks about the leaders need to be able to adapt and have resiliency. So this is a muscle that's very needed. I think interestingly, this is the fourth Federal Leadership Decoded, and I have mentioned in every session the power of being present in whatever challenges you're going through, whether it's journaling, deep reflection, but really embracing where you are. And the reason why is I've mentioned this, I know the last two sessions, I bring Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 4 into understanding resilience, right? You must find joy in your suffering, because suffering leads to endurance. Endurance builds character, and character leads to hope. And if you understand that, then you know to have hope, to have purpose, to manifest whatever you want on that other side, you're going to have to struggle and become more resilient. And, you show me somebody who hasn't struggled, and there's nothing worse. I'm 56. There's nothing worse than seeing somebody my age who gets put in a position where it's not sunny outside, or they're in the valley, and you're realizing there's no resiliency muscle there, right? So try to be present in whatever struggle you're in, because that's where the lessons are. You learn lessons you can't pay for at school, or I can't say we don't teach it at Key, but life lessons are always bigger. Mika.
Yeah, I think I'll answer this in a way that also might chime in and answer some or one of the questions that's coming in through the chat in terms of frameworks and where to get started. Um, in order to clarify personal motivation and direction. So I'm going to invite each of you to do this. You can do it too, Colin and Russell, if you want. Maybe you might want to just close your eyes for a minute and think about it. If we were meeting today in 3 years from now, and if everything aligned perfectly in your life and in your work, what would you be doing? Maybe what would it feel like to wake up on a Monday morning and be doing what you hope and want and wish to be doing? You could even think about connecting your motivations to direction. Think about like a short statement that you could jot down. You can put this in your notes. You could write it down on a piece of paper in your phone, even. I'm motivated by what? And maybe you want to move towards XYZ. So for me, I'm motivated by helping others grow. I'm motivated by creating healthy, thriving workplaces. And I want to move towards, it was for me, a role where I could bring my energy, time, and superpowers to creating that opportunity. So for me, it was business ownership. You could even think about your core drivers. Think about there's some free tools out there. Maybe it's a values inventory, or you're mapping your motivations. So maybe you could rank your top 5 motivators. Maybe it's financial security because you're younger or earlier in your career and building a family. Or maybe for those of you who are more seasoned, it's creativity. Maybe it's autonomy. I wanted some freedom. I don't know about you, but I wanted some freedom in terms of how to use my time. And then think about some self-reflection questions. What energizes you most in your work, but also in life? Maybe what values do you refuse to compromise on? And again, back to that definition of success, I told you I always stay grounded to that. What does success look like for me personally? Because it's going to look a lot different than your definition of success. And keep in mind that that's probably going to change and evolve, because it does, with the ages and stages of our lives. I think that's a good place to get started in building your own resilience toolkit, and it's going to look a little bit different. And once you do that motivation mapping, maybe that visioning exercise, you don't have to do all of them, but you take some tiny, small actions. Is it reaching out to your network? Because Colin was mentioning the power of network and community and people in your corner who will support and enable you. Is it thinking about what is a training or a skill you want to boost? For me, I recently took an AI certification class, because if I'm talking about future of work to corporate and organizational leaders, I need to understand how it works too, not just prompting, but like all in. And think about what are those tiny small steps that you can do for yourself that will fill your own cup, pour into yourself, and build resilience and restore and re-energize you as you're going through that process. Because maybe getting it from work is not the place where you're going to get that motivation and sense of purpose right now. Maybe it's the next pivot, it's the next step. I know that's loaded and long, but I just wanted to offer.
Next question. Colin, how did you come to a point of being able to identify and describe yourself apart from your career in the Army? What was the path to your ability to do that?
Yeah, I touched on a little bit earlier, but really it was doing a lot of things. When I left the Army, there was almost nothing I didn't say no to when people asked me to do. And in reality, now I'm having to sort of pull back in some places. But when you don't know who you are outside something that's defined you for a very long time, you should not try to imagine it. You should do a lot of things and discover yourself along the way. And that's what I did. I raised my hand and said yes when people asked me to be involved in things. And through that process of saying yes, I started to recognize who I was.
Mika, for you.
Okay, this is a true funny story. So, coming out of the military, I was in roles like human capital. I can't remember. I was in employee relations. That was my first civilian job. Oh, that sounds so boring. I didn't love that role, but what I did do is raise my hand whenever they needed a volunteer to do other kinds of work. So, crafting policies, screening resumes. I actually used that opportunity to learn as much about federal civilian human capital policy and law that I possibly could in those few years. And it's sort of where I started like this knowledge base of understanding the 5 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, in relation to 10, which guides the military. And so what happened was I would follow these opportunities that would present themselves outside of just the scope of my narrowly defined job description, whatever it might have been. I had a lot of different roles, but I always wanted to learn as much as possible. So, in terms of identity outside of my job description, either in the military or in government, sort of took that philosophy with me throughout any role that I held. So even while at USDA, I was running the telework work life and wellness programs for the entire department, and it was rolled up in part of this initiative called cultural transformation that the Secretary of Agriculture was very, very committed to. And I started to see the connections between organizational change, employee engagement, culture, and even what we were doing to deliver services to the American people in terms of customers experience, UX experience.
All right, folks, this is the bonus session. So please, if you can, we'll go for up to 30 minutes, up to half past the hour. If you can stay, fine. If not, you will get this on demand. So Colin, there were talks, there are a few questions in there about getting a copy of some of the chapters you wrote. I'm sure also some of the columns you've done for The Hill and Baltimore Sun. Let people know how to get that there. And there was a question in there about how you the comfortability of writing from a centrist position in today's climate. So can you pontificate on those comments and questions, sir?
The first thing you have to do if you're going to write from a centrist position is to understand that really what a centrist is somebody that both sides does not like. And so you have to sort of wake up in the morning and accept the fact that folks are going to want to poke at you from both sides. And you have to care enough about what you're writing that it's okay when that happens. So the good news is that I have actually found vast numbers of Americans who are really drawn to a thoughtful, methodical, centrist message, many more than I had feared when I started doing this a year and a half ago. But I get emails all the time also that are either poking me from the left or the right. And so the question that I always ask myself is when I inevitably get poked from both sides, is this thing I'm writing about important enough to me that it's worth it to go through that? And the answer for every piece of writing I've ever done is yes, but that doesn't mean that I've written everything that's occurred to me. So you really have to ask yourself, if this gets hard and if folks poke me, was it important enough for me to say it? And if the answer to that question for you personally is yes, then you have to write it, and you have to just be willing to go through some of the unpleasantness that comes. But there are also tremendous gifts, because for every note you get saying, hey, you're an idiot, you don't understand anything, you get a note or two also that says, thank you for helping me understand this. Thank you for restoring my faith that our politics could be better. And those notes kind of sustain you. So really understanding what you're getting yourself into, absolutely essential. Asking yourself, if this goes wrong, was it still worth it for me to do? I mean, I think the last thing I would add is one more question where you ask yourself, is this my task? And so if somebody else is better suited to comment on a particular issue and they're willing to step forward to do it, then you don't have a responsibility, and I don't see myself as having a responsibility to martyr myself over every single issue. But if there is an issue that's important to me and nobody's commenting on it, then I just kind of steel myself for the challenges from the left and the right that will come. But I do it anyway because I wouldn't recognize myself if I didn't do it.
Okay. All right. So this question for both of you and probably me also. What is the first step you would recommend a person take who feels stuck where they are, but has the desire to make a change?
Well, I'd go back to that visioning exercise. Maybe even put on your favorite playlist. Do something creative, get up and move, something to get you out of your element, and maybe just brainstorm again. If you were doing the perfect something, what would it even just feel like? Maybe you start with that emotion. And this might sound soft. It might come across as a soft skill, but it's actually a power move. And this is what employers and business owners are looking for in today's economy. People that can solve their own problems, come to the solution table with innovation and ideas. And so there is a sense of grounding and accountability for yourself that comes with these moments of uncertainty. So I would say, like, what would you want to feel like that you're not feeling already? And also, are there things that you can celebrate that are going well in your current environment, whether in your current job, in your position, in your life, that you can make sure that you hold on to so that you're not just chasing something else, but also having a little sense of gratitude. And maybe if you were to accomplish that feeling, accomplish that vision, what then would you be doing? What would be different around your circumstances? Is it that you're living somewhere, maybe less rat racy? I mean, I'm from rural Maine. It felt really good living and working in Maine during the global pandemic. Is it a flexible job where you have more options for remote or hybrid opportunities so that you have a little more time reclaimed instead of commuting? Is it a higher level position, more money, more influence? What is it that would get you feeling unstuck in that moment?
Yeah. So, and I'd add to that a few things. First, it's never too late to manifest your destiny. It's never too late. Second thing I would say is this realization that no one's coming to save you, right? You've gotta take a chance and bet on yourself. And I think if you don't know what you want to do, or you don't know what you're good at a high level, determine what your superpower is, right? Where is your magical space, but also understand what your kryptonite is, and how you do that. It's an assignment I give my master's students. I think Colin had to do this, but I know for my certificate students, it's an unofficial homework assignment. Pick 15 to 20 people. You pick the people, friends, family, kids, partner, spouses, supervisors, people who report to you. You pick 15 to 20, and you send them an email, and you put everybody on the BCC line so you get the responses individually, and you ask them two questions, right? What impact have I had on your life, and what do you wish I did better? What do you wish I do better? That will open up the aperture and give you a little bit of insight into how people who matter to you, because you picked them, how they view what you do really well, and how and where you need to improve. And then from there, I think the mistake a lot of people do is they tell you what they want to do. And I back up and say, well, tell me the problem you want to solve, right? And the problem you want to solve, one, it should be a problem, right? It should be a problem that nobody's looking at. It should be something that you're good at, and it's something that you like doing. And when you figure out what that problem is, then that'll define what you want to do, right? I've seen people who, especially in federal space, well, I want to be a 15. I want to be an SES. Why? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? Because maybe for what you're passionate about, that's actually not the right route to take. So, no one's coming to save you. Understand what your superpower and kryptonite are, and also like be present in the space you're in. Either of y'all wanna jump in on that?
I would only add that work doesn't always have to be the thing that gives us our deepest purpose. And it's beautiful when that happens, but sometimes work is the thing that pays the bills so that on the weekends and in our spare time, we can either do the volunteer work that matters to us, or we can invest in our kids or in our elderly parents. And so the sweet spot is marrying work with true love. Um, but we shouldn't be discouraged, I think, if we wake up in the morning and say, I don't love this job, if that job is giving us the financial freedom
Yeah.
do a bunch of things that we do love, I think we're still in a pretty good place at that point.
Yeah, and that's valuable what you just said, Colin, because a lot of times that value, that richness can come from outside of your work. And the work is what gives you the ability to pay your mortgage. Or if you've got, like you met, if you need to provide elder care, it may give you the flexibility to do that. But understanding for the space you're in. As you redefine yourself, how did you deal with challenges from others' ideas of what your redefinition as a woman should include?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good one. Um, well, I think this comes with age probably too. But realizing that along the way, not everyone's going to be cheering you on. Sometimes there are people that are going to throw shade or hate a little bit along the way. And I always remember a favorite quote from Kobe Bryant, actually, that says, they don't hate the good ones, they hate the great ones. And so I remember that also, you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and neither are your choices. And there is a lot of criticism that comes when you are sort of living your purpose out loud. And I mean, it's just real. So, how are you going to put on a brave face? How are you going to make sure that you're not conforming to other people's definition of what you should
Yeah.
be or could be doing? And how are you going to stay true? And I think that just is such a powerful move for yourself. You can do it in quiet. You don't have to do things out loud. There's been times where I've accepted positions and didn't put it on LinkedIn because I wanted to see how it goes first. Not everything in your life is for everybody else, meaning keep the small things small, test, iterate, and experiment. And again, remind yourself of staying true to your definition of success. It even spills over into business ownership. How many times have you seen on Instagram or TikTok these versions of entrepreneurs and founders that get up at 3 in the morning and they're running a marathon and they have their coffee and they're doing their what is it, 5 to 9 before their 9 to 5? No, that's not me. That is not why I went into business for myself. I have 3 reasons why: to have choice over my time and energy, to put more good in the world doing the things I know I'm called to do, and to keep the lights on. And so I may not be making millions and billions of dollars. I'm not going to run a marathon because that's not what I want to do. And if I'm doing those 3 things, I feel grounded and good, and I feel aligned with my sense of purpose, passion, and calling.
Next question. Good old management leadership question here. How can we urge management at every level to foster a culture of collaboration that seamlessly integrates the individual purpose into our overarching mission as we move forward? All right, Mika, Miss Future of Work, man. This is screaming. This is screaming for you.
Yeah, man. Well, first of all, I teach the skill of creating cultures of curiosity by asking better questions and much, much different questions than we're traditionally asking. So, for one, well, think about this. Any of you have small kids, grandkids, your own kids? We know that children under the age of 5, they ask a million bajillion questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is the tree green? Why is your name Russell? And when they hit school age, they start to be conditioned and learn that it's the teachers or the professors, sorry, Russell, that ask the questions and we answer. Or it's the systems, the organizations, the lawyer, the judge, the police that ask, the supervisor that ask you the questions, and you are to just simply answer. But what if we taught the skill of asking questions differently of one another and creating these cultures of collaboration and innovation? So it could just simply be thinking about, how do we invite people to solve problems in a different way? Instead of, no, we've done things this way, we can't do it that way because we've always done it this way. How might we make that work? What happens if we fail? And what solutions would you suggest to make this a better place to work? Questions like, what might be quietly draining our energy that we haven't named? How can we find some peace in this uncertainty and frenzy, chaotic world of work that we're experiencing? And what could we do differently to solve for the customer's needs? When you find ways to check in with one another in a different way and ask those questions in a better, unique way, you're also building connection and you're creating what I call instrumental assistance, which is the sense of people leaning in and helping each other out. So if I'm sick or under the weather, Colin will show up for me because he knows me a little. He understands I'm not trying to shirk my duties. I just might not be feeling well today, and he's there to pick up the slack.
Colin, what are your thoughts, especially as you're dipping your toes into this political space, right?
Yeah,
Collaboration.
I think there are people that are inclined to collaborate, and I think that the reality is that there are people who are not. And if we work for bosses who are not inclined to value collaboration, two things come to mind. The first is we still have to control the things that we can control, as Mika talked about, so that the parts of the project or the people on the team who work for us, we still have to model and be collaborative with them, even with a boss that's not. And to the degree that we can, we need to not focus on how the boss is failing us, and we just need to be the people for our team that we know we should be. And then I think that for folks that don't necessarily love the idea of collaboration or don't value it, you can still win them over if you demonstrate success. So there are some people who really like the idea of people getting along together and sharing their ideas, and that appeals them. There are other people who just want to see quarterly profits and quarterly sales rise. And so, to the degree that your model of collaboration, the way you treat people, gives the boss what he wants or she wants, which is to do better at whatever it is they value, then I think you can maybe drag them a little grudgingly, but you can certainly get buy-in from them into your method of doing things. And then don't worry if they ever accept that collaboration was the thing that created the success. Just be satisfied that they're giving you the space that you need to be collaborative with your team.
And for me, I would add, and I'm going to look at it through a more narrow talent management lens. I think it's very important if you're going to be curious and ask questions that you have you have leaders who don't mind being wrong, who don't mind being uncomfortable, who don't mind hearing bad news. You have leaders who, lack of better terms, they have emotional intelligence, right? It's good to train emotional intelligence. It's even better if you identify it during the hiring process. Uh, if you're looking at collaboration, understanding the best part of problem solving is bringing as many stakeholders and different perspectives into the room. I would look at how do we manifest where we are identifying these people earlier in the talent management process, where we're identifying and interviewing them that may need to change who you bring in, that may need to change the questions you ask, as opposed to assuming it is just that training is the sole solution.
We also want our bosses to get it. And some of them are not going to get it. And so the question that I try to ask myself now is this person standing in the way of me doing something that I think is important, like leading a collaborative team? And if the answer is no, I really don't care anymore if they're facilitating my success. I will figure out a way to be successful. And I accept that as long as they're not in the way of me doing what I think is the right thing, that I'm going to have to be satisfied with that. Because we really can become incredibly frustrated if we wake up and look at a boss who's not living up to our expectations. But as long as that boss, for whatever reason, is giving us enough space to operate, I've learned to be satisfied with that, whether they get the deeper meaning behind all of it or not.
Right. So, Colin, there's someone right now who's saying, I have a boss who doesn't have give me the space to operate, and we're not achieving success, or this boss isn't aligned to my values or the organization's values. How would you how would you address that? And then Mika, I saw you had your hand up.
Well, the first thing you have to do is recognize your own limitations. Okay. So
Right.
our expectations for ourselves cannot be so high that we're not able to achieve them. There are some bosses that are incredibly difficult. Most of them I've found you can sort of move to a place that's more collaborative and productive if you figure out what motivates them. So if all they care about are increasing quarterly profits, then let me find a way to do that. And that tends to allow them to feel comfortable enough to let me do whatever else it is that I think I need to do. So it doesn't work all the time, but figuring out what that boss needs and giving them that usually encourages them to give you as the employee space to do all of the other things. But a lot of times it's pride that stands in our way of that. Because if I don't care as much as he does or she does about quarterly profits, it's hard for me to go into the office and talk about quarterly profits all the time because I know that's not the thing that really matters. But I have to recognize that if that's what that person needs, then I have to give it to them so that they give me the space I need to do the other things that I think are important.
Mika, you had your hand up.
Well, Colin took some of the thoughts that I had around that.
Yeah, that's what he does,
I love it. But I also want to add a couple of thoughts to that model, which is in any organization, we can look to the left and the right flank, right, Colin, and see gaps. Maybe there's gaps in terms of what your team is accomplishing or how they're going about accomplishing bigger, high priority objectives and goals of an organization. What if sometimes that's a messaging problem or a branding problem? Find the holes and add value and suggest how you can solve those problems for your team and leaders. We need more intrapreneurs. Those are entrepreneurs on the inside, the people solving problems. When is the last time we talked to our supervisor or leader and said something like, "Hey, Colin, what can I take off your plate?" Or, "I see we're having some gaps with collaboration and innovation on our team. What would you say if I came up with a few ways that we could test out, thinking about creating a culture where we can test and iterate this new AI technology? Can I do that for you? I'll come up with some ideas and bring them to you on Wednesday." What if we shifted to problem solving mode and looked at the broader picture of how our talents and our interests align with solving those problems? You might be able to connect something there and add value where they don't even see the gaps because you're coming at it from a different vantage point. And that's why where you start building capital, where you start building expertise, where you start building trust and your reputation. And also, it feels a little good, right? When you are able to solve problems that other people can't see.
All right, last question, and then we're going to get on out of here. Earlier, both of, especially the question where we talked about your relationship with fear, but a couple times, both of you have talked about how you deal with failure, right? If you always have a choice, not every choice will go the way you wanted. So the question I want to ask you, especially for someone who is rethinking their purpose, or maybe they don't know and they want to try different things, is how have you normalized, assuming you have, how have you normalized your relationship with failure?
I'll go first. I think a failure is a part of who we all are. We can't be exceptional at every last thing, and it helps build character. I also like to look at it in terms of what did I learn from the experience or where there are gaps where I can continue learning. But also, failure doesn't have to define you entirely. So I often talk to my kids about this too. By the way, I'm a proud parent of two Gen Z uh, kids in the workforce now. And so think about, what is that emotion that comes with the sense of failure? You know, how does it affect your sense of self, your confidence, but also that it doesn't have to define that one moment doesn't have to define you.
Intent matters a lot. And so, as long as I know that I was trying to do the right thing for the right reasons, I have learned to not be so hard on myself if I don't actually achieve the goal that I set out to accomplish. Um, and then also, if you never fail, you probably didn't do what Mika talked about earlier, which was push yourself in challenging situations where real growth happens. And so there's a level of pride now that I take, even the experience in the Army that didn't end well for me. I could have avoided it if I did not try to do something that was meaningful to me and I think had a reason to be done. And so there's a pride you start to take in your failures as long as your intent was good and you were brave enough to take on the challenging task that might end in failure. And folks that never fail probably have not taken on lots of challenging things. And I think they're missing out on a real sense of accomplishment you can have in the failure. When you know the failure was in pursuit of something that mattered, it was just a really hard thing to do.
Awesome. So I want to thank both Colin Pascal, rhymes with rascal, and Mika Cross, Mika's CEO strategy at work. You know, Colin does a little bit of everything. Annapolis Development Corporation, writer for The Hill, writer for the Baltimore Sun. You can find him on the cruise ships probably too, you know, a little bit of everywhere. Here's where you can find them. You can reach out to them to get more information. I want to thank everybody for being here. This has been our first season of this Federal Leadership Decoded. We're going to come back in January with season 2, more opportunities to explore these different aspects of leadership and people's learned and lived experiences